Hey guys, welcome to Ozworld. So it's Saturday night here in Columbus. So before I head out, I thought I would make my first book review video. And before going into the specific book in general, I'm going to be throwing out a few episodes regarding like a book series because I believe that my generation and just in general life, especially here in America, I feel like most people don't enjoy to read. And part of that reason is because growing up in the American school system, we have to read books, textbooks from an early age up until middle, high school, and college that we don't want to read. So all those years we're reading stuff that we don't like to read. So that's why we have such a negative viewpoint on books, when in reality, there's so many great books out there, and that you should always, going throughout your life, in my opinion, keep on reading subjects that are very, very important, that maybe that you personally like, or just in general that you should need to know. One of them being finances, others can be health, self-improvement books, and then you can have your personal, such as like fiction, nonfiction, history, sports, biographies. So that's why my channel, I'm going to be doing quite a number of book series videos about certain books that affected me, that I learned quite a bit from, and then I want to share this knowledge with you guys. And then I'm going to leave the description in the link, the Amazon link description, so that you can go and order them if you want. Or here, you're going to stay here and get like a high level review from me, and then you can kind of do what you want with it. So with that, we're going to go over the first book in the series, and you can probably see from the title, it is called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And you might have heard of it, you might have not, but Robert Kiyosaki wrote this book, and it's what it states is the #1 personal finance book of all time. So you can call it a financial book, but it doesn't go into like super specific about a certain subject, such as like real estate or like a certain business. This book kind of gives a high level general overview about how you should view finances from how the rich think about it, versus how we've been kind of brought up, the normal way of viewing finances. And before I get into specifics about the book, I know when it comes to finances, it's kind of like a very touchy subject, and I want you guys to not be one of those people that becomes very defensive or kind of weird when the subject of finances come up. I'm not saying you need to tell people how much money you make, but don't be one of those people that kind of gets offended, or they kind of get so weird when the subject of finances come up. It's very important subject. No matter what job you're doing, you don't even have to be in the financial industry, but if you're working at a job and you're making money, you need to have a strong financial knowledge on this subject. So that's why I'm making this my first video. But in general, you need to have a strong understanding, and if you do discuss it with others, talk about it. It's very important. It's a fun subject, I think so don't get really defensive. So with that, let's begin. So who's Robert Kiyosaki? He's an entrepreneur. This is the first book that he wrote, the one that he's become famous for. He's written after this one quite like a number of series. They're all titled like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So today he's an author and he's a teacher, but I believe he created his vast wealth through real estate. So he goes into real estate, about his experience in it, and then some other businesses that he founded. But Robert Kiyosaki wrote this book at the time, and it came out in 1997, so it's been a little bit over 20 years. And if you watch videos or you hear stories about either famous entrepreneurs or just the average entrepreneur, sometimes they get asked the question, well, what's your favorite book, or what was like one of the most inspiring material that you read? A lot of them will refer back to this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, even though, like, let's say again, they're not working in the financial industry, they can be working in something totally different. But again, whenever you're working in business, finances, you need to have a strong understanding of it, and this book, I believe, provides that. So it's a great book. Again, I'm recommending you read it and kind of going through it and reread it. It's a very easy read, pretty short book, and you'll learn quite a bit. So let's go over the first point that Robert talks about. Oh, I'm sorry. Before that, let's talk about why he named it Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So growing up, Robert had what he refers to as his poor dad. That's his biological dad. And, his dad was the one who, the current, how society wants you to kind of go through, your life. let's start with high school. High school, work hard, get really good grades so you can get into a good college or into any college at all. And then once you're in college, you know, work hard, get good grades so you can get a really good job or a job at all. And then that job is typically going to be a corporate job, like your typical 9 to 5 job. So you work at that job or in the corporate world for the next, I don't know, 40 years of your professional life. And then hopefully in the meantime, you know, get some savings, 401k, pension plan. And then if you get married, you'll probably buy a home then. And that's become like the American society since the 50s and 60s, because during the 50s and 60s, that's when this whole 9 to 5 element of society really became the norm, because that's when these large corporations came about. And that's how the average, you know, at least in America, they spend their life. They work at a job, and not just one, let's just say the corporate world, for their entire lives. And the corporate world is defined as going in at 9, 8:30, 9 o'clock, leaving at 5 to 6. So that's what his poor dad that he refers to, that's the route that he took. His rich dad, I believe he mentioned that he didn't do so well in school. I don't know, I think maybe dropped out or something. But he, from an early age, he created businesses, and he has like a business empire of like many different businesses. So technically he was poorly educated in terms of like, you know, the schooling route, but he became very rich because he became a businessman, owning businesses, having people work for him. And then in turn he has, you know, financial freedom, kind of can do whatever he wants with his time. And that's what he refers to as his rich dad. So you have the poor dad, very highly educated, master's degree and PhD, but kind of stuck in that rat race lifestyle, 9 to 5, you know, incrementally kind of, you know, moving up the ladder, not having any freedom because you're in a 9 to 5 job, you have to be there. Whereas even if you're not, you know, educated through the school system, meaning let's say not having a college degree or a master's or PhD, you can still, he still referred to the rich dad as rich because he owned many businesses that paid him quite a bit of money. So that's like the very high level general of like the rich dad versus poor dad. And he grew up, I think it was his childhood's best friend, that rich dad, as his mentor. And then he mentions throughout the book that when he was in his early 20s, he went to the, he did a little bit of military service, and then when he came back, he had to make a decision on kind of to take on a corporate, you know, position, or to, I believe, go into sales or something like that, kind of following the rich dad's footsteps. So he can either go into the route of following his poor dad's route, or the rich dad's route. And then obviously, you know, he went on the rich dad's route, and then it's from those experiences and from those lessons from both of them that he took, and that's how he came up and wrote this book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. So that's a little bit of background about Robert Kiyosaki and how this book was created. So let's just go over, I'm not going to go over all the major chapters, I'm just going to go over 3-4 that I found are most useful that I want to mention in this video. And then on your own time, please take a look and read every chapter, get the book. I think it's like 10-15 bucks. I mean, if you're not willing to spend 10-15 bucks for, you know, knowledge that can potentially change your life, then you know, there's no reason for you to, you know, continue watching this video. So I'll go over a few of the key points, but I believe every point that he mentioned in this book is fantastic. So the first point that he makes is that the rich don't work for money. So going back to the 9 to 5 mentality, so in essence, the basic understanding when you're working a 9 to 5 job, you're trading your time for money. So you're there, physically there, and then either they're paying you $10, $20, $30 an hour. So you're trading your time for money. But if you're not there, if you're sick, or, you know, you quit your job, then you're not going to be paid anymore, because you're trading your time, and the trade-off is they're paying you for it. So that's what the school system over the last 50-60 years in America that Robert talks about. He says that the current curriculum is set up where we're learning to become those 9 to 5 workers. Like, we're learning to work for money. You know, get a degree, apply for a job, and then through that job, you're working for money, trading your time for money. And for the most part, we all are probably going to have to, we've all been through this at some point of our lives. But he mentions that from an early age, from not even, I don't want to say early age, because you can begin this at any time you want, but try to realize that don't just work for money. He wants you to find other ways to have money work for you, in which he states that's what the rich do. So what's that definition of money working for you? Well, we talked about how when you work for money, you're trading your time for money. When you have money that's working for you, basically you don't need to give your time to receive money. So the rich, no matter what they're doing, they can be sleeping, they can be on vacation, or they can be working too, or they can be, no matter what they're doing, money's still coming. Whereas the people who work for money, you know, if they're not there, or they're sick, or they're lying in bed, they're not going to get paid. So that's the biggest difference. So you're probably asking, well, how does money work for you? And that's when he goes in the next couple of chapters of acquiring assets, acquiring your own business, so that you physically don't have to always trade your time for money. So that's the key point. The rich don't work for money. Money works for them. So the second key point that I want to bring up, and that he devotes a whole chapter for this, is financial literacy. So financial literacy, going back to the American school system, so I would say most people went through like a general public school system, and at least I don't remember there being a class that was devoted to financial literacy. And looking back, now that I'm, you know, out there in the real world, you know, working, I would say that this subject should have been one of the first that should have been taught to us from an early age, because the earlier the better it would have been. Because there's people who, you know, they go through their whole lives without understanding how, you know, finances work, or what financial literacy is. So what Robert talks about in this chapter is you need to know the difference between an asset versus a liability. That's the essence of becoming financial literate. It's what's, you know, coming in and what's going out. So let's, you know, dive into a little bit deeper. So he mentions, what are liabilities? Well, most people think that owning a home is an asset. You know, two people, they get married, they probably buy a home, they live in it, and they think that's their biggest, for the most part, people think that's their biggest asset. But Robert states it's actually the opposite. It's actually a liability, because what's a liability? It's money that's going out. So since they're living in it, they're the ones, you know, paying the mortgage, the bills on it. So in essence, having a house is a liability. Yes, it might go up in value, but on a monthly basis, you're still paying for it. So how can that be an asset if money's not coming in but it's going out? Do you understand? So he lists liabilities such as mortgage payment, car payment, your bills, you know, expenses that you can't avoid. But what he mentions is that throughout your lifetime, you want to acquire assets, not liabilities. So what are assets? So going back to the home subject. So let's say you get like a duplex, and you have one half that's rented to somebody and the other half is rented to somebody else. And let's say if you get a mortgage on it, and let's just say, I don't know, the mortgage, real basic, is $1,000. Well, if someone on one side's already paying $1,000 in rent, and then the other person's paying $1,000 too, you're getting $2,000. $1,000 of that is going to the mortgage payment, and then $1,000 of it is going to you as positive cash flow. So that's an asset, because more money's coming in than that's coming out. And on a monthly basis, you're making a positive cash flow of $1,000. Other assets can be royalties. You know, you write a book, you know, the sales from it, have an app or online e-commerce business. So Robert mentions that you want to acquire assets. Don't try to limit your liabilities. There's some bills that you have to pay, obviously, but don't, you know, go out and, you know, get like a very, you know, these luxury items, you know, live in your means. Don't just, you know, if you can't afford it, or, you know, you barely can, don't keep on acquiring liabilities. Acquire assets, keep on acquiring them. And then once, you know, you have quite a bit, you can go and make a couple of like those luxury purchases that you always wanted to make. So that's what he teaches in this chapter. This is stuff that wasn't taught to us, but it's really simple when you think about it. And he goes into a lot more detail that you can read about, but that's basically the essence. What's an asset? What's a liability? And make sure that you're acquiring assets, investments that are paying you more than what you're paying out of. So another subject that I'm not going to go into too much detail about is taxes. He devotes a whole chapter regarding the tax system and why the rich don't pay as much in taxes as the middle class and poor do. So just, at least this is how it works here in America. And this has become a huge subject, because of the last election regarding President Trump. So the poor, or let's say the middle class, if you work a 9-to-5 job, I would say close to 50%, 40 to 50% of your earnings are being taxed. They go to the tax. So before you receive the money, what they do is they take a percentage out. It goes to the federal, it goes to the state, and it goes to the city or local tax. So 40 to 50% of the earnings, if you work in a typical 9-to-5 corporate job, is being taxed. They're the highest in the highest tax bracket, along with if you have the doctors and lawyers, if they have their own practice or law practice, they're very heavily taxed as well. So the middle class pay the most in taxes, but the rich, they don't pay as much. One of the reasons is if you employ people or if you create jobs, the government likes that. So as far as the tax system, they're a little bit more favorable. So that's one of the reasons why the rich won't pay as much in taxes. Another reason is because Robert is in real estate. If you own real estate, you can write off a lot of your expenses, so you don't have to pay as much in tax. And again, it's quite a bit detailed, the tax code. So there's a lot of like loopholes. I'm not saying illegally. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're legally doing it. But if you get like a good tax accountant or a good lawyer, you can, and if you have like quite a bit of assets such as real estate or a business, you can find ways to reduce your taxes as much as you can. Robert has a famous saying, is that's how this country was founded, not to pay as much in taxes because of if you know a little bit about American history, they refer to it as the Boston Tea Party. And that's why, this country started the revolution, so people can stop paying so much taxes to the British Empire. But, history, we'll talk about that another day. So, the government encourages you to, make your own money. So when you do make your own money, you don't have to pay as much tax. Whereas if you work in a corporate environment, you're going to be paying a lot in tax. When I got my first paycheck, you see the number at the top and you're like, wow, but then you start seeing everything that's being deducted until at the bottom is what you're actually getting, and you realize that, the corporate world environment, you're going to be paying a lot of money to the tax. And yes, I know you get some of it at the end, they call it tax season and you get a tax break, but it's not that much. So find ways to create your own business and, study the tax code. It's a little bit complicated, but if you want to become wealthy, it's very, very important that you understand the subject. And again, Robert devotes a whole chapter in his book regarding it. So please take a look and you'll get a better understanding of why the rich pay less while everybody else pays the majority of taxes. I'm not saying I agree with it or disagree with it, but that's just the way the system is. And yes, everybody wants change, and I know that. I think there's the recent tax law that was implemented or put in place, but if you look into the detail of it, it actually benefits the rich even more. So I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. So the final subject that I want to kind of go over is a chapter that he titles Mind Your Own Business. So if you work in a corporate job or any job in general, because you don't own the business, you're always going to have a ceiling. So everybody, wants to make more, or they feel like they should earn more, and that's why, you typically have people that kind of, ask for promotion, or then incrementally they get a little bit of a higher salary per year. But because they don't own the business, you're always going to have a ceiling. And unless you're next in line to become a CEO of a bank, which is most likely nobody, the average person's not going to be in that position. You're just going to have a ceiling, and you just have to know that. So therefore, what Robert preaches is that's why you need to create your own business. So you can have your 9-to-5 job and maybe at the same time your side hustle. Create your own business so that when it makes enough money that you can live off that, you can quit your 9-to-5, and then you can put all your focus and energy on your own business. And then, you know, as much money that, you know, you can make, you're in full control of that money that you're producing. If you work for a bank or you work for a company, you're in no control of how much money how much money that's being generated. You're in no control of how much you can actually keep it. They're paying you what they think your value is, and yes, you can negotiate it, but to a point, it's a little bit out of your hands. And don't go through your whole life, you know, relying on a salary job is basically what Robert's saying, and that's what he preaches throughout this whole book. So that's why when you have your own business, you're minding your own business on your own business. You're in full control of the income that it's producing, so therefore you can create the wealth that you want. So guys, that was some of the major key points that I want to take away from this book. Again, it's Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. It's a great read. One of the best books that I ever read. And again, it's not like a very detailed as far as like a certain subject when it comes to finances. It's supposed to be in general. It's supposed to change your view of how the wealthy and how the rich think about money versus, I don't want to say the poor, but the average person of, you know, because that's how we were brought up. The school system taught us that, or society taught us that. And again, what I mentioned earlier in this video, I don't want you to become like, you know, timid or defensive when it comes to this subject. No, you need to study, become very financially strong, like literacy wise, and once you have a better understanding of it, you'll understand how the system works, and then whatever business that you kind of go off and, you know, produce, that once you know this, you'll have a better understanding of how, you know, money works, and how you can create assets that make you money, and that in turn will have give you the financial freedom that you want, so you don't have to be stuck at a desk job, you know, for the next 40 years of your life. So guys, thanks for watching the video. Leave a comment below of your thoughts. I'll I'll give you my email as well. So shoot me an email if you have a question or any recommendations or comments. Again, I'm going to leave a description of this book. Please check it out. It's a great read. I'm sure you'll definitely learn a few things, whether you agree or disagree with it. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Talk again.